So first of all, thanks for having me. As David says, first time presenter, and I am going to talk around animated navigation. Now, this as a topic probably seems quite a simple one, but when you start to kind of get into it, start to think about it in terms of a Power BI thing, it can suddenly kind of spawn a lot of questions. So it's definitely worth thinking about. So as a starting point, as I say, first time presenter, I just wanted to introduce myself. So as you can see, my name is James Mounsey-Moran. I'm a senior product manager at Trustmark. I've been in tech for just over 16 years now, just like Ian before. Yeah, that really kind of involves a lot of different areas. So talking around desktop servers, Exchange, going back many, many years, many, many different kind of varieties of tech at this particular point, going from managing all that to somehow ending up looking at Microsoft licensing, ended up going into Power BI and all those different things as well. So for some crazy afternoon, I decided to teach myself Power BI, which kind of led on to what you can see in the middle, which is this product called Prism. So the reason why I'm a product manager is I kind of went onto this product called Prism, which is essentially something I do on something that I originally built alongside the community, which then goes a lot around kind of Microsoft usage, 365 usage, Azure, Copilot, you name it, pretty much everything in there at this particular point. So, that is used in like 1 in 20 users, or it's coming 1 in 20 users across the UK now in terms of 365 usage. So a lot of stuff, need to know a lot of different things around a lot of the Microsoft stack. But like I say, going back to it, animated navigation. So like I say, the first question, whenever I talk about anything to do with animation within Power BI, is this question: isn't data the most important? And yes, I get it. Data is the most important, but if we start to look at some of these different areas, it's not just the data. If users, first of all, if they can't navigate effectively, what does it matter? You could have the best data in the world. If they can't find what they're looking for to start with, then it's no good to anybody. These reports, these are ideas that we're building into Power BI, this kind of more of a product experience rather than just kind of building out a report. It's not just a spreadsheet. It's not just an Excel document. Everybody loves Excel at the end of the day, but actually building something in Power BI, building out this report, it needs to be something more. There needs to be something there to it. And it's not just about looking flashy. Animation, whilst we all love something flashy, all look something great, it shouldn't just be about that flashy piece. So why actually animated? Like I say, it brings in all that kind of product experience. It actually starts to actually boost engagement, things like these. And these are all the kind of stuff that I've then seen, working with a lot of my customers, all these different things. It doesn't need to be just kind of a case of, here's just the data, having something that's going to be memorable, having that kind of feedback loop. It starts to then build actual trust. Animation is feedback. And this doesn't, this applies in more than just Power BI. This can apply to your Canvas apps, everything like that as well. That animation, that feedback as you're using buttons, as you're doing different things, that's what then gives that kind of user much more kind of better experience kind of using our app. So some of the things around using animation. So my background before I kind of came into tech, I actually used to work in games design and animation in that side of things as well. So know a few things around the actual kind of animation kind of side of things as well. If we're using it in a product such as this, if we're using it in Canvas apps, Power BI, being subtle is key. We can build all these fancy things that will flow kind of different things at the screen, but we need to be subtle. Anticipation is one of those things. If you think about, if you go to hit your hand on the desk, your hand will bounce back off the desk, things like that. It doesn't move in a really static motion and come in and out, and that's kind of it. Things like the slow in, kind of slow out kind of ideas. If we just move kind of quickly back and forth, it's going to look rubbish, things like those. So what can we then do? This is how we then use animation. It's all about, driving that feedback, driving engagement, not just making a distraction, things like those. So let me demo some stuff for you. And I probably should know better as a product manager than trying to actually demo things live, but here we go. So this is how we need to be. So left-hand side, we've got some static buttons, things like those. SVGs, like I say, they've been around for ages, things like those. One of those things that's often overlooked. SVGs can include code, can include animation, and it's not there just to be making it easier so when you zoom in and zoom out, it doesn't lose all your kind of quality. It can be used for animation. So it means we can then start to apply some of these SVGs, some of these animations, some of these actual principles into some of these buttons. So we can start to actually animate things, start to kind of build borders around things, animate things a bit more kind of interesting, as it were. And like I say, we can start to then utilize some of these tools kind of going forward. So if I look at things like these, so this one here, this is the kind of code. This is the SVG underneath this kind of static one in the background that you can see over here. Animating a bit more, there's really not much more to it, things like those. And what I generally will use, so if I copy some of that, if I generally kind of utilize SVG view, because it's just easy to then see. So there you go, that's the same kind of SVG we then have in here. We can then copy that animated version in. And there you go, simple as that. I can start to kind of break things out. And things like these, if you're kind of not if you're not used to SVGs, not used to kind of animating some of these things, putting them in Copilot, generating things in there, it's really easy to then start kind of do, say, generate me an SVG of a chevron. Things like this. We can go in here, make some of these SVG, these code, really, really quickly. So there you go. There's some code. Let's take that back into here. So there you go. I've got an SVG of a chevron. Simple as that. I could then animate that through Copilot as well if I need to as well. So if you're not comfortable with using that, Copilot's going to help. Things like that. So what I generally do would save them in there as well. But it means I can then come in here and build some of these quite quickly. So for example, let's drop in a button, clear button within Power BI, really kind of straightforward stuff. So what I can come in here and then do, I can then start to kind of add some of these things in here as well. So let's kind of say, add some text in. So this is my button. So, button, a navigation button, as you kind of will. Let's make it look a little bit fancier just to make it easier to see while we're going in here as well. So things like these, generally drop ins and pad in, all that kind of stuff. Because what we then have in terms of the icons, in terms of buttons as well, and there's a lot of these things in here now around kind of utilizing the image visual, which has added a lot around kind of SVGs and things these days. So it can make it much easier. But if you want to just use some of these buttons, you can do as well. So we go icon type, we go custom. We can come in here and add in some of those files as well. So these are kind of a couple earlier that I've literally just shown you in terms of those kind of code kind of areas. So SVG static. So there you go. Same as what we had on that kind of initial page, pretty much here in terms of that static button. And what we can then do, very, very simply, we can come in here, change to on hover, move that kind of area across, go back to icon. We can then actually then drop things down as well. So replace that this time with the animated. So simple as that. We now have a nice animated button as well. So it means we can then do exactly what we want to do, start moving some things around. So very, very quickly, we can start to get to that point. We can apply some of those borders. We can start being a bit kind of clever with some of those things as well. So again, on that kind of hover kind of area as well, we can start to move things around. So just need to make sure you obviously then clicking in those certain areas, do what we need to do in terms of those, how we then manage. So we can then start to kind of build things out really quite quickly. So as you then started to build out these things as a kind of a navigation menu, things like those, this is something that I've then done in a lot of my kind of areas around kind of utilizing Power BI. So my use case of Power BI, I don't have obviously the same, because I'm using it as part of a product, I don't have the same, filters that you would then have down the left-hand side in terms of your pages. I'm utilizing a lot around kind of Power BI embedded, things like those. It goes into a more kind of SaaS solution, a hosted solution. So navigation, useful navigation has to be kind of really paramount in terms of what I'm then doing in terms of making sure my customers can get to that end result, much easier, much quicker, but at the same time making it actually engaging, making it worthwhile. And things like these, feedback in terms of how my product Prism looks at the moment, in terms of how it's presented, how it kind of has that kind of UI, how it has just these little things, as you then go into navigation, having that level of feedback as customers are jumping in instantly becomes much more powerful, makes things much more engaging. And like I say, the customers initially start off with that level of trust that you've put that extra level of information, extra level of detail in terms of what you're doing before they even get to any of the data, any of the kind of underlying visuals, anything like that. You've spent that extra bit of time managing what you can do in terms of kind of navigation and things like those. It's going to make much of the difference. Navigation is literally that first piece that they're going to interact with. So let's make sure it actually counts in terms of that space. But yeah, that's pretty much me. So thank you very much for having me. So